Okay, so welcome everybody to the SIAM industry panel discussion. The topic today is from applied mathematicians to entrepreneurs. We have the privilege of having 4 panelists today. First, let me start off by thanking the SIAM, as well as the SIAM Industry Committee, the committee members, as well as the VP of SIAM Industry Committee, Amar Al-Bakri, for the organization of this of the panel. The 4 panelists are Marina Brockway. She is the founder and CTO of VivaQuant. She's worked in a Fortune 500 and emerging companies that manufacture implantable and wearable medical devices. She holds a PhD in applied math and an MS in physiology and an MBA. Dr. John Burke is co-founder, CEO, and president of Applied BioMath. He holds a BS and MS in applied mathematics from UMass Lowell and a PhD in math from Arizona State University. Dr. Alan Butler is the president, CEO at Daniel H. Wagner Associates, Inc. since 2008. He holds a BA in math from Texas Tech University and a PhD in math from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Sohail Faruqi is the CEO of K-12 Insight, a provider of research, customer service, and community engagement solutions for K-12 schools. He co-founded the company to meet the emerging need for stakeholder engagement in public schools. Thank you all for joining me today. So let me start off with a few set of questions, and then if you have questions in the audience, please post it on the Q&A channel at the bottom of your screen. So the first question is a rather simple one. So most of you, all of you actually, are founders and co-founders of your companies. What are some factors that led you to start your own companies? Who wants to go first? Alan?
I can go first because I'm not actually a founder or co-founder. So as it turns out, the founder of the company was Daniel H. Wagner, but it's a good story. So he was a mathematician, and he was a theoretical mathematician, got his degree from Brown University. And when he got out, he went to work for the Center for Naval Analyses and discovered, much to his surprise, that there was some really cool stuff you could do with mathematics in that area. And so a few years later, well, he also had an interesting thing. He worked on personal computer construction for a little while. He could have been really rich if he'd stuck with that, but instead he founded his own company. And the point was, his philosophy is to hire the best mathematician he can find, independent of what their particular area is, under the assumption that they've proven by getting their PhD that they can learn new math. And so they come in and then they learn whatever areas of mathematics they need to apply for to work on different problems. So that's a little bit different than being an applied mathematician in a focused company. If, for example, you're working at Ford Motor Company, then the problems you work on are a little bit different than an open consulting company like ourselves.
Right. John, do you want to go next? What are some factors that went into founding your own company?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's the story we can tell over a beer and maybe here, so I'll just focus with the story here. While I was doing my postdoc and then I was research faculty, I was consulting for a lot of companies. The term didn't exist yet, but we were inventing systems pharmacology. How do you mechanistically model the mechanism of action of a drug, along with, let's say at the time, what people called systems biology. I'm going to just vaguely call it ordinary differential equations of disease pathway or something like that. And it was fascinating. And I really feel like we were bringing engineering and mathematical approaches to solve questions that people really weren't doing yet. It was very empirical, very expensive. It's still expensive, but very empirical, throwing darts on the board. It's like, man, this could be regularized and turned into math and engineering. So long story short, I then was asked to start the global systems modeling group at Boehringer Ingelheim. And, you know, it was working, and we were saving time, we were saving money, and it was wonderful. And I got to the point where not just large pharma shouldn't have these capabilities, all companies should have these capabilities. So 7 years ago, we started Applied BioMath, and we've been growing quite nicely since. And it's been a lot of fun. It's been a challenge, but it's been a lot of fun.
Very nice. Marina?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank SIAM and thank Lalitha for inviting me and organizing this panel. And I'm listening to John and thinking there is a theme here. Actually, we see the trend that is coming in the industry, kind of a new industry being born. And I wanted to catch up on that train. In my case, I worked for implantable medical device company, cardiac rhythm management device. And I saw wearable devices coming on board. It's becoming less and less expensive to measure your vital signs, but they're really, really bad if you just measure it with a regular microchip. So, and it is interesting to see how there is a schism between people who work for medical device industry and a wearable device industry. They each look down upon each other. But there is an opportunity to democratize your healthcare, and healthcare specifically to monitor your own health and being able to proactively manage that. And this is where I see our company mission is. We develop technology to make it much less expensive and remove noise and make it so everybody could look at the signals and understand how to manage their health. I'm actually wearing a device. I'll be shamelessly bragging. This is a device that we commercialize. It's FDA approved, and it helps save people's lives at a fraction of a cost of an implantable medical device.
That is so cool. What is that? Can you tell us a little bit more about the device?
This device is measuring electrocardiogram 24/7 all the time, analyzes beat-to-beat data. It's the only device that has a cell phone inside, basically. There is no other devices that patient needs to wear with that. It removes, and it has a really long battery life. Typically in industries, probably at the minimum is a half a day, maybe a day. Our device battery lasts for 7 days. So it is designed to be convenient for people to wear and to understand their health. And also another thing with the wearable devices that kind of go into face for the doctors. They seem to alienate the doctors in providing so much data that doctors don't know what to do, and a lot of false positives. Our goal is to work in partnerships with the doctors and people in the industry to make it accessible, and so everybody is benefiting from that, and most importantly, the patient.
Right. Thank you, Marina. And last but not the least, Suhail, who's also my ex-colleague and a good friend.
To see you, Lalitha, and thank you to SIAM and to you all for this opportunity to be on this panel. So I'll echo what Marina said. Marina, when you showed the device, I was thinking maybe you could do the math by applying Moore's law as to how many years it'll take for that device to become microscopic, because I think that's the direction in which it'll go. Look, the benefit of going last on a question like that is that I think anything meaningful I had to say has been said. So I would echo pretty much what people said. But, you know, I'll get a little philosophical. I was reading this past weekend some stuff. There was a quote by Rumi. And Rumi said, what your heart is seeking is out there in the universe seeking you. And I think in some ways, most of us who sort of journey from what you'd consider whatever we were doing to starting something on our own, there's a mix of insanity, but a deep yearning inside of you. And I think, you know, as I reflect on it, when I look back, there was never really a plan. It wasn't like, there was never really that moment where I said, I'm going to do this. You sort of follow the curiosity stream of your conscience, so to speak. So you keep your heart open to exploring questions. And, you know, others have said this before, the whole idea of why not this? In my case, there's a story sort of over beer, as John said, which I'll spare you the story, but the bottom line was that, you know, in the industry where over the last 20, 30 years, we've been so data focused, there was a whole body of data analysis that was developed that mostly focused and targeted operational data. People started to analyze what do customers buy at Walmart? What do they buy in the mornings? What do they buy in the afternoons? What do they buy on weekends? You know, you've probably heard the famous story of beers and diapers. On Friday evenings, grocery stores found that they did what is called market basket analysis, which means what things are bought together, right? And they found like a very higher correlation of people that bought diapers also bought beer. And I think that's the sequence in which it went, right? A young father was going to the was coming home from work, and the wife said, don't forget to get diapers for the weekend, and said, it's the weekend, I'm gonna go. So grocery stores made actual changes to the layout of where they, you know, stocked items. But I think from my personal journey, I looked at that, and there were a couple of personal experiences where I said, operational data has been analyzed and will continue to be analyzed deeper, but there's an opportunity for perceptional data. It's what your customer or anybody upon whom your success depends is thinking. And it could be anything from you reaching out and saying, how are we doing, to making it easy for them to share you that feedback. And I think the last 20 years with the advent of social media has been all about that. But the picture that emerges when you marry the two is both at once deeply promising for what it can do and deeply scary for what it can do. And I think my personal journey was sort of through that porthole, and just a lot of luck in the midst of all that.
Thank you, Sohail. So as you know, the audience here primarily is undergraduates and graduate students, early career member, early postdocs. So I think, Alan, you mentioned you try to hire the best mathematician you can find. So perhaps one or perhaps more of you can share what would be a typical, if you can say typical career path for a new hire in your company, someone with a science or a math background. Alan.
Okay, so most of the work that we do is projects that vary in length from 6 months to 2 to 3 years. And when and all of our projects involve some software development. So when a new PhD starts at the company, they would work on an existing project. They would come in and say, okay, here's the proposal that we wrote that won this contract. You should review that. Here are the references we think are the most important ones. Here's the notes from our kickoff meeting and perhaps a PowerPoint briefing and so forth, and bring them up to speed. And then the project manager would say, okay, what we really need is a new algorithm that does this, or an improvement to this algorithm, or something along those lines. And they'd start working on that. And they may only work on that project for a short period of time, maybe 3 months or 6 months. And then they'd go through the same process with another project. But what happens over time is a new project comes up that refers back to a particular area that they've worked on before. And they say, hey, you're now one of our more knowledgeable people in this area, so we need you on this project. And so you end up working not just on a project, but on more than one. And within a year or two, you start looking at the requests for proposals from various organizations, and you typically you would be mentored in writing a proposal to win your own contract. So the paradigm is, when you start out, you're working on contracts that other people have brought to the company, but eventually you rise to the level that you're the one who's bringing in contracts so that the younger people can work on your projects.
That's interesting.
Thank you, Alan. Did anyone else want to add anything to it? A typical career path, John?
Yeah, it's funny. I want to repeat everything that Alan said. That's very interesting. But I want to add to that. I think when we do look for new hires with people with a math background, obviously they have to know about, for at least in our field, dynamical systems. Have you ever run a system of ordinary differential equations, right? Coding is important. People can say they can write for loops and recapitulate, let's say, data that a model might have to recapitulate, but that doesn't mean they can actually do it. So we have to ask questions around that. So know math, know how to code a little bit. It'd be great if they've heard about some biological terms, right? Because that's nice to know for us. Like, have you ever heard of a phosphatase or ubiquitin or a receptor or a ligand? Not everyone does, but these are nice to haves. But then at the end of the day, yes, hire really the best people, just like Alan said. But I would say what trumps all of that are the nicest people, right? That's very important in our screening. We need nice people that can communicate, because oftentimes when we're working with the biotechs and the pharma, we are the communicators across different fields. We'll come in and force the different groups that should be talking with each other anyway, but they, in my opinion, they often don't. And we force them to talk and agree to a mechanism of action of a disease. Like, are we all on the same page? Because we have to be on the same page if we're going to model it. And you'll notice that I'm like, I don't think the disease works that way, or I don't think the drug works that way, or I don't agree with your interpretation of the data. So we oftentimes have to be brokers in those discussions, right? So that's great. It's just very important to be able to communicate across disciplines, and then communicate the value proposition and the results of math for disparate groups of people. Like, it might be a CSO, it might be a senior VP, it might be a CFO, it might be a modeler, it might be a lab technician, right? But we have to be able to communicate across all those fields. So then to add to Alan's point, as we're growing, our junior people become more senior, and they mentor, and they become project leaders and project managers, and then they grow, and then they grow, and they help with writing contracts. So it's certainly a lot of fun also.
Right.
Nice. You got to be nice. I think that's really important.
Well, Lalitha, may I just add to that?
Course.
So and I'm going to keep it on the philosophical track for a little bit, because I completely agree with what Alan, and especially with how John re-emphasized it. For those of us if you've seen the movie Shawshank Redemption, right? The sort of the seminal scene there is Morgan Freeman, he's up for his parole hearing every time, and the answer he gives each time. But if you find on YouTube, there's his final parole hearing where he says that, he tells the parole board, he says he reflects on the young man who committed that terrible crime. And he says, I want to go back and talk to him. Now, promise you have not committed a felony, but I reflect on my professional journey and the company that you and I first met. And I look at what I knew and how I approached things, right? And I want to talk to that person, right? But I can't reach him. But here's perhaps an opportunity for those that are still taking the journey or crossing those bridges. John said, nice people. Before I come to nice, which is extremely important, I would just say I love the idea of industrial and applied math, because the application of what you study in your classroom usually is hard to find in the academic setting. So I would encourage everybody to embrace internships, practical working experiences, and now it's become easier. And by the way, don't approach it lightly. Take it even more seriously for the nuance of what you're experiencing than you do in an advanced class, because that's real life. The amount of time I've seen it takes for us to onboard a new, brilliant, bright, highly qualified, academically very gifted, high GPA, highly recommended candidate into professional success, there's a significant gap, I would say. I think academia and the university, even the best university, has a huge gap from what it takes to succeed academically. That'll be my first point on technical skills. On the skills about being nice, as John said, I think people should open up to, particularly those academically inclined, to reflecting on self-awareness and their mindset. There are books on this, there are YouTube videos on this. More of that will become a hindrance to your professional success than anything you didn't read in math in your linear algebra class, right? Your ability on how you collaborate, you harness the best out of somebody else, you get people when they see you to cheer up as opposed to wonder what it is that you're going to throw at them. Those are going to be some of the biggest factors. Being able to play with others in teams, to be a star, your rise in the professional world will largely rely on your ability to do all of that. And sometimes I think, at least going back on my journey, I was lucky. I had some mentors who sort of, despite myself, forced me to face these realities. but colleges don't teach that for all they charge on tuition. And certainly, we all rely on luck in a boss or in a mentor too.
Absolutely, absolutely. So that segues beautifully into a question by Gary Petko. He's the PK to 12 mathematics supervisor for Knox County Schools in Tennessee. His question is, what advice would you give to a high school math teacher to help prepare their students best for a career in the field of applied math? And I know, John, you talked about dynamical systems, although that's not quite taught in high school. Suhail, you talked about internships and communication and teamwork. Are there any specific courses that you would recommend a high school teacher bring up with their students? Marina, you want to go? We don't hear you, Marina.
Yeah, I was muted, so thank you for letting me know. Yeah, ironically, we hire a lot of high school students. In general, we have just a really young workforce, but we start them only as interns. And it just allows, as the other panelists said, it helps you a student to ease into a company. And I know, and I hired a lot of interns when I worked for Boston Scientific as well. They're only starting to hire high school students. I think smaller companies are more open to that, but so it is an interesting opportunity for that. But as the panelists said, it's the personal qualities are just so much more important in a smaller company because we have fewer people, and it's just so much more important for us to maintain the culture of the organizations that we set up to be. As far as the courses, I do think that computer science is just a must. It's basically a language to which you communicate your ideas too. But also, you mentioned differential equations. In my point of view, every difficult problems in math could be decomposed into much simpler problems that basically relate to calculus too. So it just ability to break them down that would differentiate between a really very successful mathematician and like me, not everyone.
Fair enough. Yeah, high schools do offer BC calculus, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, and so what is important also, in addition to what we mentioned in our case, is ability to take initiative. And be reliable with what you ask for, and also ability to ask good questions. I think ability to channel a discussion between people who know their field is so much more important. We all learn from each other. Right. So that's the soft skills that high school students, I think, may want to kind of brush up and know which class.
Absolutely. So there was a question here on the chat on whether this is going to be on YouTube. They had to run off to a class. Absolutely, this is being recorded. It will be on YouTube. Question here is, what are your opinions about talent/startup incubators, such as Entrepreneur First? Are any of you aware of that? Okay, John.
I think it's a great idea. That's the easy answer. There's so few mentors out there. It's always nice to ask for help. I think just closing the loop on asking for help and having incubator space and mentors. I think at least at our company, I think we're 95% PhDs, right, and postdocs. But this comes to asking for help and the ramp up for getting it steady state, if you will, is goes to of what universities teach and what they don't teach. You are taught, in my opinion, you are taught and encouraged to be a sole, researcher. You don't ask for help. You do it all by yourself. And after the 400 to 600 years of grad school, you're arguably the best person in the world, at least in your, in what you're doing, especially at your university. Now, all of a sudden, you're in industry and you have timelines. We're confident you can do these things on yourself, but it's a different mindset where you get rewarded for asking for help, right? You get rewarded for working on teams, right? You get rewarded for sharing, and that's just an opposite mindset. And I do think that having incubator spaces fosters asking for help. There's whether you're shared lab resources, if this is biotech, or you can talk to the entrepreneur down the hall, or maybe you run into a VC, a venture capitalist, or someone who's supported by venture capitalists. It's the sooner you get over that hump to say, it's all right to ask for help, the better. So I support these types of initiatives. They're going to take a piece of the pie, probably, but that's okay.
Lalitha, I'll just add to that on incubators. I think, the principles are as follows, right? I mean, I think there's a book out there that sort of argues a point, and I forget who the author is of the title of the book, that, you largely sort of become the average of the 5 people that you spend most time with, right? And I think it's so important in life early on to just elevate the quality of the companions that you keep, where you hang out at. And I think an incubator, even though at first it's definitely an outside of the comfort zone type experience, but we all should spend a substantial time, especially early career, outside of comfort zone. Because what that does is it elevates your baseline. It's sort of like what working out does, right? And I think it's really critical for industry people who are in academia, if they really want to make real life impact, because you can research. And what's his name? Jim Clifton wrote a book about innovation. Jim Clifton is the CEO of Gallup organization. And he writes about how much knowledge exists in our laboratories versus that which has made it to the marketplace. And believe it or not, I mean, we all joke about how Al Gore, whether he invented the internet or not, because there was a claim to that, and it makes for, funny conversations. But there is some real credit that he gives in tying some people who are very close to how the internet was commercialized for the role that Al Gore played in getting it out of the National Science Foundation into practice. So for people who are bright and brilliant and want to leave a mark in the world, you have to get out with people who are doing practical stuff. And the second cliche, I think I'll sort of lead. I'll take care of all the cliches in today's conversation. And the idea of never being the smartest person in the room, because if you find yourself frequently being the smartest person in the room, you need to go to another room. And I think, again, I'm speaking largely to early career or aspiring entrepreneurs. Get outside that comfort zone.
Very good. Thank you, Sohail. So, sorry, Alan, go on.
Well, so to say that in a slightly different way, there's a lot more than just the technology, right, to starting your own business. And in the incubator environment, you make friends with people who are doing the same thing, even if they're working in a different technology. And you can ask these questions like, well, I'm worried about this. Do I really need to expand this quickly? What if I go through this money before? And all those kinds of things. If you try and solve those problems yourself, you make lots of mistakes. But if you talk to others who are going through the same process or who have been through the process recently, you can make much smarter decisions. So incubators are perfect for that. Perfect.
So here's a question from Amar Al-Bakri, who is the VP for the SIAM Industry Committee. How important is continuing education / training in your company? How do you keep it current? How do you get people? Yes, John.
We set aside budget for all of our employees to go to 1 to 2 things a year, whether it's like an advanced course on immunology, whether it's how to do this type of mathematical modeling. So we put in formal processes in place for that, as well, and also setting aside professional development on, over the next year, you're going to become an expert or more of an expert at this. That's probably not math related, but it's more related to our field. It's pretty darn important.
Right.
And then we rely on them to bring that investment back into the company, right? It's important.
Right. Okay. Sohail?
We call it growth. It's as part of continuing education. We believe that every team member should have formally defined annual goals for growth. Now, growth is the the parallel track to aging, right? We'll all age. In a year, each of us will be a year older. Whether or not we would have grown is not a given. So time guarantees aging. Time does not guarantee growth. Growth has to be intentionally embraced. And so it goes back to that mindset. The mindset says within the company, there should be a culture of coaching. And by the way, it should go from all the way to the top, from the CEO down to the junior most team member. And each of us should have certain, the self-awareness coach will help you understand where you may need some, professional development. It may be a technical skill. It may be you go to a conference and attend a seminar that will allow you to be better at something. It just may be how you come across in the organization. It's just empathy. It's just this, the whole concept that I, in the last couple of years, my personal growth has been in this whole area of inquiry before judgment. Even though it seems like something was completely messed up, hold that judgment until you've talked to the relevant parties. And it's surprising to me the number of times I couldn't have done a better job than they did. And really that changes the culture and climate in the organization. If we were germs, we were microbes, a petri dish in which we were operating has a very different chemistry if the mindset is right. The second thing I'll say is we've, just like John's organization, we've set out funds for people to take formal courses if they need to. But what's happened is the world's so different. I mean, I spend an awful lot of time on YouTube just sucking in content that's relevant to me. It's all free. It's so convenient. I mean, this is a dream come true from 20 years ago when you and I or 25, close to 28, 30 years ago, Lalitha, when we were grad students, that learning has become like, if somebody could have given a magic wand to say, transform your learning opportunity world, I don't think we could have done a better job than where the world has come today. So,
right. Good point. So this is a very specific question. This person has a BS in math, a master's in applied math and statistics, and a PhD in scientific computing, right? When they've gone to career fairs in the past, they've been met with a response, we're looking for engineers, and been told knowing math and computer science is useless if you don't have the domain knowledge to go with it. So their question is, do you have any advice for either how to respond to employers who don't appreciate the skills mathematicians bring to the table, or how do you go about finding employers who do? Anybody? Suhail?
I think in today's world, any employer that gives you that answer is not the employer you want to work for, is my very direct sort of outlook. I think it's clear nobody's going to be working exactly on the coursework or the classwork they took. You're hiring people for two things. I think it's been said before. You're hiring for their mindset and their personality they'll bring to the workplace, number one. And number two, it's not what they learn, but it's their ability to learn anew. So demonstrated skill to absorb whatever is the challenge before the organization. By the way, even it's to identify and cover even challenges that the company or the organization may not even know exist, right? Because at least for those of us in the software world, no one person in the organization knows it all. It's the person who's interacting with the customer every day who's discovering new ideas. So the person who has more sort of exposure to the world is likely to. So I'm not surprised that there are organizations that would respond like that, but I have a feeling that they are on a timeline to extinction, and unless they change.
My response would be the same, actually. John?
Exactly. I would also, a possible response is diversity is good, right? If you have only engineers, you're not bringing these other skill sets and thought processes in, right? It's another way of thinking. You're formally trained to think a different way. It's just shocking to hear that still happens. It's just shocking, right? Run away. You're not going to fix that problem right there. That company you just stay away from.
Well, actually, I've been on this side. I was trying to get to medical device industry for 2 years as a mathematician, and only after I got an MBA, I became more attractive to them. So I'm surprised that it's still happening. I think there is a lot more receptiveness, especially from the perspective of data sciences and modeling, I think companies should be becoming more receptive to that. But as one of the maybe, if you still like that company and still want to go to that company, even though they don't want you, I think you may just wanted to try to learn a little bit of their application area and try to see, you need to prove them that your skills, which I think I hold superior, because you could basically take a solution from one industry, mathematical solution from one industry, and transfer it to another solution, which nobody else can do. It's much harder to learn math than application area, really. So try to come up with this, prove to them how you could help them solve the problems that they are now tackling.
So I'll second that, Lalitha, may I?
Yeah.
I just feel that there are two sides to this challenge. I think I second the point Marina is making, which is if I were the candidate, and again, I go back to, the me that used to go to job interviews back when and try and knock some sense into me, because I used to just show up in my best suit that I had and best tie, whereas what was needed was a couple of hours of investment in learning about the organization and the people I was going to talk about. Now, I have a good excuse because LinkedIn didn't exist back then, and every company's annual report, if it was a public company, did not exist. I couldn't search the Google news section of Google to see what had happened there. But I am, again, in the same proportion that I'm shocked by the company that says, well, gee, your degree or your minor is not in this field, so you're not qualified. I'm also surprised by the number of candidates who show up to interview who haven't the slightest clue of what the organization does. And I'll tell you, when we work with our sales team and we're going to go see a prospect, somebody we're going to tell the story to, we feel like we need to earn the time that they give us. I mean, they're busy people. There's no shortage of things they could be doing. And there's the amateur version of it, and there is the pro version of doing your homework. And I would encourage everybody who's looking to get a job, they have a favorite organization, ask yourself how adequately prepared you are. Get yourself a coach. Practice interviewing. And I'm going to throw out something that's really dear to my heart. It's the realization that children of privilege, or young men and women that I interview who have risen through privilege, just so much better at all the soft stuff that happens in a job interview, which gives them an edge. And often children who've come from what you'd consider disadvantaged families, often Black and brown children, they've got the academic credentials, and they'll come, and I'm calling them children because I'm 51 years old. But people in their 20s, early 30s, they just did not have someone, again, in their career who told them, if you're going to go interview, and if you're going to apply for a job to corporate X or organization Y, here is the first paragraph that you need to write to grab attention, because it's a crowded world out there and you need to stand out and apart. And I don't think it takes too long. In our prospect pitches, we spend 1 hour before we go and see a school system. And it's intense, like you zone out. You're in Google, you're on people's LinkedIn profile, and you'll find a common thread, a topic of interest that draws them to you, that allows you to tell them how you can make an impact in your organization. It's meaningful. It's not some high level, very intangible stuff. And there's a way of doing it, which I am asking people who are professionally advanced to reach back and help young people figure out how to do that. So I think it's a two-sided story. There's some responsibility with that young person who's early career person who says, look, I don't have the degrees. I think there's a way to tell your story to get people's attention also.
And actually that segues beautifully into the next question. And maybe this is a question Marina can take, because you talked about internships, Marina. For someone with a pure math background, how do you recommend they market themselves for internships? They bring a lot to the table, but they don't have too many projects to show for it. How would you suggest they market themselves?
I think people with pure math background are smarter than me, applied mathematician, to start with. But I think I'm just gonna refrain, Suhail said, is you want to do a homework, and it is not difficult to learn application area to the extent that you could be sound knowledgeable, at least to the first interview. you really want to do your homework, people, and at least learn vocabulary for them. Right. And I do think that easing in with internship is will open more doors than doing right after PhD. People kind of look for work experience already at that time.
So we talked before about courses and skills you want to learn. We said at the high school level, but also at the university level. And one of the things you can do to prepare for this situation is to choose a course that's not in your field, but is in a related field. Obviously for us, that would be a quantitative course. And take that course. Doesn't have to satisfy any degree requirements. What that does is when you go for an interview, either at the internship level or even for the real job, you're able to say, look, my best skill is I can learn new things. And here's an example. I went and took this microbiology course or this quantitative methods in business course and so forth. And, you know, it was wonderful because I learned these new things, and you give them like a simple example of you worked on this project or you did whatever. So I'm saying two things here. One, I think that's a good thing to have, but it's also something you learn if you take interviewing as seriously as you take learning a new math, differential equations or topology or whatever. Interviewing is a skill. You can get better at it, and there's lots of information out there you can find that will teach you how to do a better job at interviewing, to take what you already know and what you've already done and be ready to answer questions. You can do it just like a politician. If they ask you a question you don't know the answer to, you spin it into something you've already prepared and you sound good.
Very nice, Alan. Now, I think a couple of you talked about the data sciences, right? So could you comment on what role does AI/ML play in your companies and your services or products?
It is really important for developing what we're doing, developing algorithms in our case. But you want to be aware of stakeholders that may not understand and may be just threatened by that. We work with, I'm on a National Institute of Health peer review committee, and it's interesting how they started to bring more people from industry, but there are a lot of just physicians, because that's where they're who is going to be using the product. They think like it's a black box in a way. The FDA thinks it's a black box. You want to be able to, to explain it in a way that makes people more comfortable and confident with using the product of that. And it may not be on a level of a student who's looking for a job, but as a company, we need to be able to explain it in a way that is comprehensible for people who we do the work for.
Right. Anyone else using AI, ML in your companies, John?
We do use it in our company, AI, machine learning. Sometimes it's under the auspices of bioinformatics. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. It depends on who you talk to. My concern with AI and machine learning, this is just my opinion, is that there might be a lot of over-promising and under-delivering right now, at least in pharma and biotech. Like, we're the smartest people out there. We're coming in, we're going to save the industry. Because on the other side, I've seen, oh, these smart people came in and they told us this is the answer. But I know, as an experienced immunologist or oncologist, that the results they came with were wrong, because I know that B cells and T cells do the following, and what they suggested was incorrect. So this, again, is you have to be very careful, be cross-disciplinary, work in teams, know your clients, know your science, and try your best not to overpromise. And I'm just worried about data science coming in. It's like, it's all data. I don't have to worry about the underpinnings of what's going on. And I see it, and it gets me nervous, because there is a lot of fear of math out there. And If one person does something poorly, we all do it poorly. I've noticed, at least in my field.
So for someone listening to us today, how would they go about finding opportunities in your companies? Is there a process? Do they go to the websites of your companies? What would you recommend?
So crack open the door through internships if possible, or, right? I mean, for early career people, for more senior positions, and especially smaller company, and I'm talking, if you're a couple hundred people, you're a small organization. People are much more careful about, what positions they open up. I mean, the ability to really get in an organization through something like an internship is a lot better. When companies do, companies like ours that do post an open position, I think and we had to bring in the pandemic at some point, right, Lalitha? So I thought I would do it for this conversation. What the pandemic has done is it has eliminated geographical barriers for where our teams are. So we did a senior executive search this past month, and had it not been for the pandemic, we would have looked for or required that person, because it's a leadership team position, we would have required for that position to be based in the DC metro area where we are. We basically, sat down in April, May, and we said, that constraint doesn't apply anymore, because we've now been exposed to a new way of working, and it seems to be working. And so we were able to cast the net wider. So I would say anybody who's looking for a position, you ought to just free yourself from that constraint as well, and reach out to what you consider is an ideal target organization. One of my coaches and mentors also says, suspend certainty. That's his sort of line. So I would say, you may know that you want to work for, and I'm just going to pick a name, you may know you want to work for Google out there, but suspend that certainty and expand yourself to maybe 5 other organizations that you may not have thought of, and try, and I think the universe will surprise you.
Very nice of you. So here's a question. Go on, Marina.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. It is harder to find it. I would think that it's harder to find a job in a smaller company, just because we don't actively advertise like larger companies do. They have specific periods at the university campuses where they come and recruit. But I know that some states are actively starting to promote that. And maybe the answer is not specific to our company, but in general, for example, in Minnesota, there's Minnesota SciTech Experience organization that is supported by state of Minnesota to encourage young students to work for small companies, and they match the funds and they encourage matching. So try to look for those as well if you are considering a small company to work for.
Thank you, Marina. So
Lalitha, one more thought on that.
Yeah.
Most people get jobs through their networks.
Yeah.
And so especially in COVID time, reach out to people. And by the way, make deposits before you make withdrawals, right? Which is reach out to people, not because you're looking for a job, reach out to see how people are doing, open your heart to being curious, to seeing what their big challenges are. And I liken it to just putting some dots on your board. And after you've talked to 20 people, you will figure out that there is a pattern to those dots, and there's a way to connect it. And you're the first person who can articulate that, because you've been doing that. So the 21st person you talk to now, somewhere in that conversation, you'll find that there is an opportunity. But just sitting there and being an audience is going to give you a disadvantage. What you want to go out there is become a part. You get on the stage and do stuff.
Very good. And so Haley, in part, I think you're answering this question that's coming up next, which is quite interesting. It says, as an experienced mathematician and a machine learning engineer in the industry, I sometimes wonder what I can offer that's unique as an entrepreneur. And how do I market myself? And I think that's exactly what you're saying. We just talk to about 20 people, get a feel for the dynamic, and then you'll know exactly how to talk to the 21st person. Did anyone want to add on to that? Okay, so let's see. Here's an interesting one as well. With COVID and remote working being part of a primary reality. Okay, these questions are disappearing before I can even read them. Okay, here we go. With COVID and remote working being a primary reality for a lot of people, how would a potential employee demonstrate team-based qualities? You know, the ability to work well with others. Because I think, Suhail, you'd emphasize teamwork, right? It's hard to emphasize teamwork when you're kind of isolated in a room in your house.
I think most companies are starting to understand that their HR function post-COVID is going to be very different than it was pre-COVID. And they're going to figure out not only things, you know, in the selection process to determine that, but post-selection, I think, you know, HR is now called human capital management. People are going to figure out things that you have to do in order to stay charged up. It's, you know, I think we whether it was real or not, we believe that just because we gathered in the same physical space, we kind of had a pulse of what we were all about. I think that's going to become much more intentional now. And so I would say that, you know, what you can do is if you are a team member, just make sure that you don't default to being silent. Right? So strike the right balance between being shy and the person who's always got their hands up. As a company, we gather every Thursday for an hour, right? And we do that now because we have to. And there's a different sort of agenda each time on a monthly basis. But, you know, if you've got 60, 70 people on a call, what's your role? And there's always that moment in an all teams call where you could either write something or say something. And post-call, you can call a team member and say, I really liked what you said, because you did, but you didn't know that it was important for you to do that. And those are what I call deposits. It's just like your checking account. Every time you make time, if you look at stories of great leaders, there are people who spend an hour a day with just writing thank you notes to people, or a handful of notes they'll write. And the cumulative effect on that, on your professional trajectory, I think is nothing short of miraculous. And so even if your early career, just read up. There's plenty you can just get for free on tips. And if there are certain habits you can cultivate as a result of that, that just demonstrates your humanity, your concern, your sense of awareness, your caring. It's funny, you can't hide that stuff for too long if you wanted to, on either side of the equation. If you were deficient in that, and just because we're now behind computer screens, I don't think that's still going to be possible to hide that.
Very good.
Do you mind if I ask a clarifying question? The question, when it was asked, do you think that was from the point of view of I'm interviewing and I want to show people I'm a team player, or I am within a company already and I'm trying to be a team player?
I think I'm interviewing and I want to show I'm a team player. I think that's the way I understood the question.
Yeah, so I think for at least for our company, so when we started, we were a virtual company. So as we grew and we could afford it, we could get, you know, brick and mortar sites, but still we were always very flexible. You didn't have to come in. It's just a different space, right? So when COVID hit, we already had a lot of the processes and culture. Like it didn't hit us hard, right? I mean, if anything, we're going around, because people aren't commuting, like I'm going around and saying, please don't work so much, right? I never thought as a CEO and a founder of a company, I'd be like, please don't work so much, right? Please take time off, right? You know, I forget how many paid holidays we have. It's in the employee handbook, but you know, on top of that, we have a month off, right? Because it's hard what we do. You need to take time off. You need to de-stress. We have people from all over the world. So, you know, if we plan ahead of time, maybe you go to Europe or Asia for a month, right? So, right, we try to be as flexible as possible. So culture is important, but to the point of interviewing, if anything, under COVID, I think we're learning how people are team players in the interview process, because you learn how people react to uncomfortable, scientifically difficult questions. You learn like, oh, who did what, who did this? You know, you learn if someone's more talk or less talk. And the fact that we don't have all-day interviews now, which exhaust people, we now have, like, you know, maybe Tuesday they do their job talk and they present their research, but then, you know, over the next week they're having their one-on-one meetings with people. And if anything, I think we're learning more if people are team players or not. So I would take that interview process very seriously. It's okay to admit weakness. It's okay to admit you have development opportunities, although you wouldn't use the word development opportunity until you ran into your first HR person. And just, you can show that you're a team player, and it's okay to say, well, I did this portion of the work, but my colleagues did this portion of the work, and this is how we worked well together. So you can really shine in an interview, right? Without being, let's say, too ostentatious.
Yeah, good point. So I have a question, which is, as the president or the co-founders or founders of your companies, you're trying to balance many things on an everyday basis, right? How do you deal with interruptions? You're composing this email, someone's pinging you on the side, your phone's ringing, another email pops in and needs, immediate response. How do you balance many things that you do, and how do you deal with interruptions?
I think you have to stay focused. So I recognize emails are popping up, phone is pinging and so forth, but I try and finish one thing at a time. Then I'll quickly look, see what things have entered since I last looked. And if there's something that I consider a fire, then I'll respond to that right away. Otherwise, I continue on just sort of trying to hit one right after the other. And there are times when I'm not able to respond until the next day. And you have those people who expect responses right away, and they learn over time, okay, just because I didn't get a response immediately, I may get one the next day. They also learn if they don't get one in a couple of days, they better ping again, because the queue, they've fallen outside of my visual queue, and I need them to hit me again.
Any other thoughts on how to handle interruptions?
Lalitha, when I was at Schlumberger, they had me take this course on just all the soft skills, and there was a time management session that Brian Tracy does, which I've since found that you can access on YouTube for free, and he gives practical steps on make a list, prioritize, always be working on the most important thing. At least a theory part of it is pretty good, right? It's how you translate that, but I think there are some very practical, very useful, helpful, practical tips on how to deal with this. The part that was hardest for me as a chief executive is when you grow from a smaller organization to a large organization, learning to delegate. That's a very difficult journey, because you're always, you have a certain standard of quality in mind, and if you've had a negative experience having delegated it to someone, then you're forever going to be shy about trusting if somebody can run with it. And so there is this particular question you're asking is honestly the first step to an entire management and leadership, both of it. The strands connect to all of that. But I think John mentioned earlier about asking employees not to work too hard. Well, the boundaries are gone now, right? There's no 8 a.m. and 5 p.m. in the sense that it used to be, and certainly my Fridays and Saturdays and Sundays and Mondays all sort of seem the same, because it's in the same house, in the same room. I'm dressed more or less the same way, a nice shirt on a pajama, right? So I think reading, there's a whole body of literature around all of this that people can avail of, but it's the important stuff, especially now.
Very good. So we are
I
coming
want
up.
to piggyback on that delegation. That was probably one of the hardest things that I had to learn is delegate. And because we, as mathematicians, we're trained to give answers ourselves. And as in academia, we grew up giving answers ourselves. It actually is very important to learn how to ask questions, to give people, to promote and celebrate people's creativity and celebrate their achievements.
Very good. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we are coming up on the hour. So I just want to take a moment to thank all of you. And there are many more questions on the Q&A, which we were not able to get to. But we hope that in the breakout session, which will start 5 after the hour, we have a couple of slides here. Tim, if you want to pop up the slides on how to join the breakout session.